So I invited Andy to come and give us a talk, not realizing, though I should have done, that just what an expert person he was and how he ticks so many boxes for us. He's from the National Museum of Wales, which is only across the estuary, the channel from us, no distance at all, especially with Zoom. He specializes in invertebrates and has had a great career there, looking after marine invertebrates, particularly worms. And as such, was a contributor to a major study that Coastwise drew on more and more during the noughties, when we were trying to prepare ourselves for a marine conservation zone bid. I mean, Andy, you probably don't realise that North Devon hasn't got, well, you may realise actually, has got very few marine specialists. I would say we haven't got any, but if you know of any, tell us, because we'd like to draw them in. And it's a shame because we have such a wonderful coast. We're very grateful to Jan, who set up our Facebook page and has now got contributions from people like yourself. And that's really beginning to empower us, and we're hoping to do much more. At the moment usually we meet on Thursday mornings, so we're an older group, but we have aspirations to recruit youngsters, and sometimes we can get the FE College to join in, but they have a very strict timetable and they're not really functioning fully at the moment anyhow. But you also link to a museum, and as a taxonomist, I think you're a fairly rare animal. There aren't enough taxonomists around. We don't have any, I don't think, anymore. We had one. Our previous curator was a marine enthusiast, but he left, what, about 18 years ago. And with him going, we have no expertise. So we're looking to you to tell us about fantastic animals, the worms. We have in Robin, who I hope will pipe up and talk to us quite a bit during the question and answer session. We have someone, I think, who knows rather a lot. And is a member, I believe, of Porcupine, and you're for.
I know Robin, yeah.
You know Robin, right?
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
Maybe we can encourage Robin to do more with us in future. But I'm going to hand over to you now to tell us all about Polychaetous.
Okay, I'm going to share screen now. So I'm Andy Mackie. I was head of marine biodiversity, and then in a larger scale, I was in charge of invertebrate diversity, which was basically polychaetes and mollusks at the National Museum. I took voluntary retirement as part of these normal cuts that come around 4 years ago, so I'm now an honorary research fellow. I've also been president of the International Polychaete Association as well. And we hosted the 12th International Polychaete Conference in Cardiff in 2016. So I used that really as my going away sort of thing. And that's the logo from the conference. So, okay, so we go into some basics. So think about taxonomic research. It really is at the base of everything else to do with biology. We really need to know what kind of animal we're dealing with. And these definitions are the ones I've used. So taxonomy for me is the description and classification of animals. And then we have phylogeny, which is the evolutionary relationship between them. And then we have systematics, which is taxonomy and phylogeny together. And of course, what most people are interested in is identification, which is really what is something. So it's a practical application of taxonomy. Now, some people will disagree with these definitions and will say that the whole thing is just systematics. So these, people like to use different terms for different things, but to me, this sort of compartmentalizes it. And you can see in the diagram at the side how taxonomy is sort of in the center, and then it impinges on virtually everything else to do with biology. Obviously, ecology is a main factor. So, right. So polychaete worms. So what are they? Well, really, polychaete, the name polychaete means many bristles. So it's really segmented worms with lots of bristles. And then most people will be familiar with other annelids. So you'll be familiar with, I say there's a polychaetes if you're doing marine stuff. Oligochaetes, mainly like earthworms. The marine oligochaetes are generally much, much smaller than terrestrial ones. And you will notice them in certain situations, but a lot of the rest of the time they'll be very small and you might not even notice them. There are more species than they used to think as more and more people got interested in them. And then, of course, you've got leeches, and there are marine and terrestrial leeches. So again, the terrestrial ones tend to be bigger than the marine ones. So that's basically just a rundown of the groups that are in annelids or associated with annelids, the segmented worms. So just to recap, we have in annelids, we have polychaetes, oligochaetes, and leeches. We also have another small group, which is called branchiobdelidans, and they're crayfish worms. So they're freshwater. So this is the traditional sort of grouping of annelids. Is that within annelids you have polychaetes, you have oligochaetes, you have leeches, and you have branchiobdelidans. Now, recently, with lots of work with DNA, what they found is this isn't exactly the right situation. And so if we move on, so the oligochaetes, the leeches and the branchiobdelidans are all part of the clitellata. But with, as I said, with DNA, what's happened is that the situation is more like this. So now you can see that the clitellata, the oligochaetes, the leeches and branchiobdelidans are actually nested within annelida, and basically polychaetes are all the other ones. So essentially, Polychaeta is a synonym for annelida because it's not a separate entity. It's because the clitellata are within polychaetes, if you see what I mean. But having said that, most people know what a polychaete is. Even they might not know the species, but they will know what they think a polychaete looks like. So it's useful, and we still do. We still use the term. So it's a matter of, well, what do we do? How do we call these things? So there's lots of different things we can do. We can say that they're annelids. We could just call them all annelids. We could traditionally call them Polychaeta, a class within the annelida. Or we could be more informal and say they're just polychaetes, or polychaete annelids, or bristle worms, or Polychaetous annelids. For this title, I've used Polychaetous annelids. The main reason is simply it's a sort of homage to a lady called Olga Hartmann, who was the world expert from about the 1930s up to the 1970s. And she was based in the Allan Hancock Foundation in Los Angeles. And she always, on her papers, always called them Polychaetous annelids. So in a way, she was probably ahead of her time in not particularly calling them Polychaeta, or, well, she did call them Polychaeta, but in the titles of her papers, she generally used Polychaetous annelids. So it's quite a nice name, but polychaetes, polychaete annelids, just, all these things are fine. So just to recap, everybody will know what a terrestrial oligochaete looks like. The earthworms, the Ainsenia fetida, the one you'll get in your compost bin. And then on my right side, there's a marine worm. And this is quite a large one. This is just on the shore, tubificoides. You get lots of these in certain situations. particularly when it's a little bit muddy and leeches. The one on the hand, that's a medicinal leech. Now this one, you can't really see the parts of it very well, but it's this is from a leech farm near Swansea. They breed them and grow them up for medical use. So it keeps the blood flowing during operations. And then the one on my right, that's it's probably from a fish. It came up in a trawl off Western Norway, and there were skates and things in there. So I think it's probably off a skate. But I'm not an expert on leeches, so that's for other people. Now, Branchiobdelidans, you probably haven't come across these crayfish worms. There is supposed to be an indigenous species, but nobody seems to be recording it in recent years. But a few years ago, a student from Cardiff University came to me, and she had these worm-like things on the signal crayfish, which is an invasive. And it's from one population only in Wales. And so she asked me what they were. So I quickly determined they're crayfish worms, and then we set off identifying them. And they occur on the claws. You might see these little dots here. They hang off the claws. You can get hundreds of them on a claw, and also they get in the body and between the legs, and sometimes in the telson as well. But mostly they're on the claws. And there's two species here which we found on the same crayfish. Now, the danger is that, of course, that they get transferred to, well, not just this population, which is in a fairly small tributary. But its danger is that they get onto other signal crayfish populations and also onto the native one as well. So Cardiff University have got a research program on the crayfish, and now they've got research programs connected to the worms as well. Yeah. So the next big slide, which will come up, is just shows the same two crayfish worms, and it's actually one individual, and it just shows you how they can stretch, just like leeches. They can be quite compact, or they can stretch out, relatively quite long. Now, Branchiobdelidans are like leeches, but they don't have a sucker at each end. They only have a sucker at one end, and at the other end, they usually have some papillae around the mouth, and then they have sort of tooth plates inside, upper and lower tooth plates, which they use. And you can see this little dark mark here on them. That's the jaws. So I hope you could see that. And this is just to show you the paper which we did on it. And at that time, there's been a lot of activity in Europe, and these crayfish worms, which originally came from the west coast of the United States with the signal crayfish, are actually all over Europe now. And in actual fact, there's actually additional worms, but as far as we know, these are the only two that occur in Britain, which are Zeronogaiton victoriensis and Cabarinicola ocade. And that's an interesting one because it was described from Japan, but it was actually already imported from the United States. So it shows how easy it is to transport animals with other animals. So bring in signal crayfish for, say, restaurant trade. You bring in these things. If somebody throws them in a stream or whatever, then you inoculate the stream with not just the invasive crayfish, but also with its ectosymbiotic hosts, not hosts, worms. So we'll go on to polychaetes now, and so I'm just going to go through some families and tell you a little bit about them. We're going to start off with the scale worms. We're on Aphroditidae here. The common one you'll know is the sea mouse, which is Aphrodita aculeata. This is another one, but in this one you can see the scales easier because it doesn't have the felt over the back, so you can see the scales here on it. And this one's from off northern Norway, yeah, fairly deep water, but you do get them in British waters as well. But you're not likely to get it on the shore. So that's Lake Menisi filicornis. And then the ones you're probably most likely to find are the polynoid scale worms. And Alentia gelatinosa is one. It's quite a nice one to find. You might think it's just a lump of slime initially because the elytra, the scales on its back are very floppy. And this is actually quite a small example, and it's also interesting because you can see it's regenerated its tail. And that's one thing that Paula said at the beginning about regeneration. Now, polychaetes do different things. Most of them can regenerate their tails. There's some that can, but some can regenerate their heads and their tails. And some of them use the sort of regenerative process as a method of reproduction. But generally, if they've got a well-recognized developed head, then they'll happily regenerate their tails. But you know, if something eats their head, then that's done. Now, scale worms are quite interesting because some of them will actually throw off their tail, which swims away if something's trying to eat them. So it's like a distraction. They will split off the tail will wriggle around, and hopefully the predator will go for the tail. You get quite a lot of the different types on the shore. I've just got a few here. Some are more specialized. This is one called Harmathoid glabra, and it's a commensal species, often with Aranicola, the lugworm. And this one's from Aranicola diffodiens, which is the big lugworm, often called the black lug. And it just lives in the burrow of the lugworm. So if you're ever digging a lugworm up, just have a look alongside the lugworm when you dig it up, and you might find a scale worm. So this one is a Harmathoid glabra. The next one, this is the head end of it's a different specimen, but this is the head end of Harmathoid glabra. The first one I showed you, the whole animal, that was from Berwick upon Tweed. This one, this head end, is from Porthcawl on the South Wales coast. And initially I thought it was broken, but in actual fact, it had a tiny tail regrowing. So that's why I just showed the head of this one, but it was quite nicely arranged. So these are the elytra, the scales on the back. Some species are very, we might call nervous, and if you even just touch them, they'll throw the scales off. Other species will hold onto the scales, and I'll show you just a couple of these just now. So again, this is one called Malmgrenia Aranicolae. Again, it's a commensal with Aranicola. This one's collected at Berwick upon Tweed, but with Aranicola marina, the blow lug, your normal lugworm. And this one tends to hold onto its scales. And you can also see the scales have got this particular pattern. Now, the Malmgrenia group, this is quite common in the Malmgrenia group, this type of pattern. And there's quite a few species, and often they're specific to different hosts. So you'll get some that are on echinoderms, you get some with worms. And so echinoderms, I mean, like leptosynaptids, sometimes with echinoids, and different species seem to be on different hosts. Again, it's quite interesting thinking about the regeneration theme. You see some scales are lighter than the other. I suspect that they've been, a predator or something's tried to eat this. It's probably had to throw off a few scales and it's regrown them, because often you get them all dark with this brown marking on them. They're very nice animals, actually. They look very pretty. And this is a common one you'll get just under stones. Oops, the name's wrong, sorry, I forgot to change it. This is Lepidognotus clava. There's two species of Lepidognotus in Britain, Lepidognotus clava and Lepidognotus scomata. And certainly towards the south and southwest, you'll get clava quite commonly. It goes all the way up to west coast of Scotland as well, but I would say probably scomata is more common further north. Okay, going on to other. This is not a polynoid. This is a sigalionid. This is an animal called Stenoleus boa. Again, you'll get these typically under stones. They can grow quite large. This is actually a small one, only maybe 4 inches long, but you can get quite large ones, and they've often got a very brown, yellowy brown pigmentation on the scales on the back. But you can see it's a scale worm again. If you ever catch one of these, there's another one called Sigalion matilde, which you'll get in sand, especially when you get Lanichi conchaliga, the sand mason worm, that type of environment. You often get Sigalion matilde on it, and it will look similar, but if you ever get a chance to look at the scales, you'll see that on this, not on necessarily on this one, but on Sigalion, the edge of the scales got papillae on it, and the papillae have got secondary papillae on them, so they're very interesting to look at the scales on them. Okay, right, paddle worms. These are a favorite animal that you'll find on the shore, and the Eulalia clavigera, which people call the green leaf worm, is a favorite. Most people used to call it Eulalia viridis for obvious reasons, viridis being green, but we're not sure if viridis actually occurs in Britain. It's a Scandinavian species, and the one that we've typically got on the shore is clavigera. But there are other species, so it's possible that we do have viridis, perhaps in the north somewhere. And Dave Fennick from Cornwall, he's found another species of Eulalia, which produces a sort of yellowish fluorescent type mucus. And I think he's describing it with a friend of mine, Arne Nygren, who specializes also in doing DNA work, which again is becoming more prevalent in Polychaetous systematics. So I just thought I'd say a little bit about cryptic species. I've just mentioned that Eulalia viridis, Eulalia clavigera, you know, for a long time they just called it all viridis. The same thing, this is another one, Eumida sanguinea, and everybody called things that looked like, in terms of keyed out as Eulalia sanguinea, they all called them the same thing. But with genetics, then they started looking at what they call cryptic species, which are essentially species that look morphologically the same. But this paper looked at some European ones, and they found that within the sanguinea group, they got 10 species. And you can see some of them here, A, B, C, D, and they look like they've got different patterns of color and things. But unfortunately, they then did subsequent work and they found similar colors and things in the Mediterranean, but not necessarily matching up genetically with similar colors from other places. So it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more worms around than people think. And this is only going on color, of course. So this is color and genetics. And that's why, you know, people like me like to look at more details, like the bristles and other things, to try and see if we can find some morphological differences between these groups. But anyway, just to tell you that there's a lot more species around than we think. And this one was actually named after myself. This one comes from, this specimen actually comes from Northwest Wales. But my friend Frederick Plale and Arne Nygren, they found this in Plymouth, this animal here, and they named it after me. And again, it's another Humida of the Sanguinea group. And yeah, it's very pretty. It's only a few centimeters long, but it's actually more common than you think. It's just that everybody would have called these. Well, this one they might have called Humida bahusiensis because of these green bands on its dorsal side. But anyway, it's a separate species, and bahusiensis itself, which came from Sweden, is likely a complex of species as well. So it's a complicated situation. So Phyllodosa is another animal that you species or genus that you'll come across, the paddle worms, and some of them are very large indeed. I mean, so this one is Phyllodosa laminosa. It can grow to 45 centimeters or something, a large one. The place I've come across it most often is, in terms of abundance, is Millport. And there's a beach just near the marine station there where they're very common on the shore, large ones just under stones. Normally on most beaches I've been on in Britain, you're lucky if you find one, but in Millport they're certainly very common, and it's quite spectacular. That's just a close-up of the head, and you can see it's got a pattern on it. It's slightly iridescent as well, but mainly green color, and you can see the two eyes there, and then its palps and antennae. There's actually 4 projections here. These are the antennae. The palps are similar size, but are underneath, and these are what are called tentacular cirri, and the paddles or dorsal cirri, these are along each side, which gives it the name of paddle worm. So another one, again, this is quite a common one, really, but most people might not notice it. It's quite common in sandy beaches and things. You'd often find them in a sand mason worm tube. Now, whether it's actually gone in there and eaten the sand mason worm, or whether it's just using it as a home, I don't know. But again, this can be quite long, maybe 20 centimeters long. And this one's got its proboscis out, and this is typical of Phyllodosae species. You can see there's papillae on the proximal part, and then much larger papillae on the distal part. And then there's large papillae around the mouth. Normally this would be tucked in, like furrowed inside the animal, a bit like a sort of inside out glove, and then it can shoot it out, catch its prey, and pull it back inside its gut to digest. I should have said earlier, when we're talking about the green leafworm, is that if you put a green leafworm beside a nereid, a ragworm like Perineus caltrifera, which has got jaws, you might think the nereid with jaws would eat the paddleworm, but in actual fact, the paddleworm will eat the nereid, and it just shoots out its proboscis, latches onto the nereid, and then pulls it inside its gut. The last bit you'll see going in is its jaws as it takes it in. So they're quite adept, quite good predators. Yeah, and another Phyllodosae. I'm just showing you quite a few of these because the Phyllodosae group tends to give people problems. This is Phyllodosae groenlandica. Again, I don't know if anybody's looked at it. It's possible it's a complex of species because it occurs from Greenland right down to our waters and on our shores, and sublitterally as well. Again, you can see a different pattern of pigmentation. You can also see the papillae are in regular rows in this one. And again, that's a taxonomic character people would use to help distinguish the species. So that's Groenlandica. It can get quite large as well. On some beaches, I mean, up in Scotland, you can find them quite easily on the shore. So this is just a synopsis of some of the ones I've showed you. Now, I haven't shown you before just now the two that give people most confusion, which are Phyllodoce mucosa and Phyllodoce maculata. Now, Phyllodoce mucosa has got the front half of the head is pigmented brown, and it's generally quite brightly coloured. The back of the prostomium and on the first segment. Maculata, this one's actually quite a pale one, so it's not so clear, but often they've got bands of pigment on these few segments just behind the head. So this would be all brown all the way across. You can just see it's very faint here, but I've collected them up in Scotland in holdfasts, and in fact that's the place I've found to be most abundant, and they were very heavily pigmented. Again, the head here, you can see it's not, the anterior part is not pigmented brown. And then again, you can see Groenlandica with its lines of papillae on each side of the proximal part of the proboscis. Phyllodoce laminosa has just got small papillae all over the proximal part. Mucosa has lines of papillae similar to maculata. And then lineata, the rows are not so distinct, they're not separated. They are in rows, but it's more, the whole thing is covered in it. But these are not the only ones. I should say most of the ones that you'll get down south, I would expect to be mucosas. It's a sort of common one down here. I'm not sure how abundant maculata is. So this is another one, quite a small one. This is Jeffreyi, and it's similar in a way to pigmentation in a way to maculata. You can see these brown pigment lines across the first few segments, but you can see, if you can remember what the paddles look like, these are much more rounded. The parapodia have a different shape as well, so it's got longer anal. So there's quite a few different things. The pigmentation's different, doesn't have it's got more lines, a bit more like Groenlandica rather than mucosa or maculata. This one's from Plymouth, just in relatively shallow water. And then probably the prettiest one is Phyllodoce rosea. It's very spectacular. It's quite a small one. Again, you get it in the same sort of areas, sandy areas. There's the sand mason worm, and I suspect that the ones in Scandinavia are actually a different species. But this is from Britain, and it was originally described from the British Isles. So I'm pretty sure this is the right one. But yeah, very pretty with its red pigmentation, and then two lines of red down the back with a yellow line down the middle. Not particularly large. I mean, only a few inches, but still very nice. This is just another one. It's got a nice pattern on it. This is a thing called Meister picta, and it's quite a flat animal with small. The paddles don't really look like paddles. They're more like blunt lobes. But it's a paddle worm, and if you can find this again just in shallow waters on the shore, a few inches long, and it's quite distinctive, so you wouldn't mistake it for anything else. Okay, we'll go on to psyllids now. So this is a Psyllus species. And there are a lot of different species, and they're very hard to identify. Some of them have distinctive patterns on the back, but they are the same pattern can occur in several different species. So to identify these, it's more looking at the type of bristles it has, how many articles in these cirri. Often the cirri alternate, long ones, short ones. There's lots of different characters you have to use to identify these. They're quite tricky, and really, even though a lot of people worked on them, they're still a problem to identify. This one's Ambliocilus spectabilis. This is quite a favorite for people finding on the shore because it is very attractive. The Ambliocilus species have a very small number of segments. Spectabilis was described from the UK originally, but there are other species around, and they tend to have different color patterns, but some of the species can look similar to others. It's Pelargus. This is Pelargus varicosa. I forgot to put the name on this one. This one's from Brittany, this one. You should get this in British waters, but it's certainly not common. It's quite a long animal, several inches long. And this is the head region up here. Okay, moving up. Sorry, I've gone back again. Moving on to the ragworms. I've just shown you some that you might not see normally. Everybody will be familiar with what I call the harbor worm or Nearest diversicolor or Hedisti diversicolor in estuaries. Very common, great food for the birds. This is a different one. This is quite a large one, relatively speaking. Nearest irorata. Somebody recently said it should be called nubulus, but to me, he didn't really prove his point very well. But this one lives in tubes under stones. And so sometimes you turn over a large stone, you might see a tube and think, well, this is a terebellid worm or whatever. But in actual fact, there's an arid in it, and it's this particular habitat. So quite nice. Another one that gives people problems are the Platyneruses. They're quite common, but the species are hard to distinguish. This one, I've called it Massiliensis rather than Platynerus jumerili, which most people tend to call all Platynerus. And one of the things about this one is it's got, oops, I have to go back. Come on. It has these blunt parapodia, which is quite typical of Platynerus, and then quite long cirri. There's a couple usually quite long, but if you can just see in here, there's some quite large yolky eggs, and that's the reason I'm calling this Massiliensis, because jumerili has thousands of tiny eggs, whereas Massiliensis is known to have large yolky eggs. So that's the basis why I'm calling it this, but the situation may be even more complicated than that. This is an interesting one you may have come across. This lives commensally with Eupagoras bernardus, the large hermit crab, and it lives inside the hermit crab shell. It helps keep the inside of the shell clean, and it also comes out and steals food from the hermit crab. So there again, you can see it on the side there, poking out. It comes round the side over above the pincers, so, and then goes in to catch whatever the hermit crab's eating. And that's what it looks like. And these can be quite large, maybe 6 inches long. So that's a whole animal, probably a female, but when they're ripe, the female has sort of purplish eggs, quite large, and distinctive color pattern on it. And this is a male, which is reproductive, and it would swim up into the water column and fertilize the eggs when the female was ripe as well. Neanthus fucata, that is. No, I thought there was. Oh, that's a shame. Okay. Ah, here we are. Julia Donaldson did a book about sharing a shell for children, which is quite fun, and it has a worm in its shell there as well. So there's she's done this little book about how different animals are associated with hermit crab. So it's quite nice if you've got kids or grandkids. Okay, just moving on quickly. This is a Nephtidae, a catworm. It's they all look similar, so you have to look at the parapodia mainly to identify these. This is Homburgi. This is quite a common one on sort of sandy mud habitats, but there are about a dozen species in our waters. Okay, this next one's quite cute. This is a spherodorid. This is very small. This is only about 3 millimeters long, and you can see on the back there's small bubbles, and that's what gives it its name, Spherodoridae. This is a dorsal and ventral view of the same animal, and this is from up off Norway. It's probably a new species, or it might have been described by now, but very, very nice little animal. I should say I took this photograph on a research vessel, just holding a macro lens. So this is these pictures are extreme crops of the picture because the animal is so small. But luckily I managed to get it in focus. So goniadids, I haven't got a picture of the glycera bloodworms. These you have come across these probably on the shore. They shoot out the proboscis, got 4 big jaws on the end, quite a fierce animal. The proboscis can go back maybe into a third of the body. This is a related family, the goniadids. They have sort of a circle of teeth round the mouth. This proboscis is not fully extended. Goniadids often have these chevrons on the basal part of the proboscis, but they're basically like glycera. I think this one's Goniada norvegica, I think. But quite the norvegica can grow quite long. The typical one, normal one we get in shallow waters is Goniada maculata. But we do have Goniada pallida as well. So Morphiza, these again common sort of in sort of galleries and rocks on the shore that have, especially if they've got sort of horizontal crevices and things, but you will get it under stones as well. There may well be more than Morphiza sanguinea in Britain. Something I want to have a look at because there may be another species here. In France, they've described another one. So, and it's another. These are unicids. Again, Morphiza belli, another type of Morphiza. On Morphiza belli, the gills are restricted to a short region of the body. In Morphiza sanguinea, they're on most of the body, apart from the anterior. Then another unicid, Lycidice ninetta. Again, these are quite common. You can find these on our shores, under stones and things. These are offshore, but they're quite cute. These are Hylonesia tubicula. It lives in this quill-like tube. Now these actually live on the surface, and they pull the tube along with them. And they're sort of scavengers, predators. And you'll notice if you look at the base of this, the tube here, these are translucent. There's these valves, so it can shut off both ends of the tube with these valves, and it can project itself out or hide inside. Quite nice animals. quite common offshore, especially in the deeper waters. Another onuphid, this is Nothria species. The species are a bit mixed up taxonomically, and these have a distinctive tube, which is quite flattened, made with lots of stones cemented to sort of chitinous inside. And so they're quite short animals, whereas Hylonesia is quite long. These are quite short. They don't have, this is about half the animal, the head end here. So yeah, so that would be up to about here, and then the rest of it would be inside. Again, they'll be on the surface of the sediment and offshore. We do have these in offshore here, but as I said, the species characteristics have been a bit mixed up. So we know we've got different species, just putting the right name on them is a little bit of a problem. Okay, going on to, I've got an awful lot more to do, but I'll just try and go through these quickly. Magellona, these are shovelhead worms. They're very typical. They've got this head, which is like a spade. They use that partially for digging. They've got these two palps, which come off the ventral side beside the mouth. And this is Magellona mirabilis. Everybody used to call it Polychaetous, but Polychaetous is a different species from Brazil. So this is Magellona mirabilis, described from Berwick upon Tweed, and this one is from Berwick upon Tweed. Quite a long, thin animal, quite easy to find on certain shores. And that's a close-up. And one of the things I want to show you is this, the way it holds its palps. Now, we've had these in the lab, and it holds its palps up into the water column, and it seems to filter the water. We've never seen them eating sediment or anything, but we just see them with their palps out, and they've got papillae on here. So we've kept them for months and months and months. So they must be eating microorganisms or something, because they're not eating any food we put in. Now, this species is very like mirabilis. This is a ventral view, and this is its buccal organ, I would say. It's not the same as a proboscis, because the mouth is actually doesn't go through this. This is actually a separate organ. The mouth is actually between this and the prostomium, the spade-like prostomium. And this one, it doesn't have this sort of stiff bit here on the palps. And this one eats, if you put some sort of fish food in, you might feed animals in an aquarium, this will gobble it up and use its palps to collect it from the surface, and it'll eat them. You can see the material going down its gut as well. One of the differences between it and mirabilis is it's got these pouches and just behind the thorax here, and these are open at the front. What they use these pouches for, nobody knows. We've tried to work it out, but never managed it. This is a larger and more shorter, more stumpy animal, Magellona alleni, described from off Plymouth. Very pretty animal, but much more robust than the ones I've just showed you. And it's got this red marking on the posterior part of the thorax. The thorax ends here, and this is the abdomen. So, yeah. It's a tiny animal, Stigocapitella. There's a Portuguese, well, he got his PhD now, but he was studying these, and he came to Britain to collect some. He collected some at Plymouth and some other areas in South Wales. And he's done a paper of them, because this species, or this genus, shall I say, occurs all over the world. And everybody used to just call it the same thing. But he started to divide them up into different species now, partly using genetics as well. So this one was called Stigocapitella subterranea. I'm not sure. I'd have to check up whether he's given the British ones a different name or not. But, okay. Scoloplus, a typical urbinid that you might find. The ones that we've got are not Scoloplus armiger, but that's something I was working with a German lady on it, which hasn't been published yet. But the one we've got is not armiger, but there are 3 or 4 species of these or in northern European waters. But very common. Another arbinid is much larger. This can be 20, 30 centimeters easily. Arbinia, massive palisades of bristles in the thoracic region. This is Arbinia. I think it's Latrelia. I can't remember exactly. And the gills start on segment 5 here, and you can see them going along the back down here. There's a student in Norway. He's studying arbinids. He came across last year to Oban and the Porcupine Conference, and I was there to try and help him do the research. And then, of course, COVID came, so we had to stop. Anyway, this is a spectacular animal, Chaetopterus. It's one of the animals you'll see in textbooks, but it's a very unusual animal. Lives in a U-shaped tube, has these large lobes here, and it forms a mucus bag. So it actually filters the water, and then it rolls the bag up and eats it in its mouth. Has these massive paddles here, which create water movement through the tube. So drawing water into the tube past the animal and out the other end. This one's quite a large animal. The typical name for it is Viriopedatus, but that's wrong. And it's a bit for an argument about what our species should be called. There's a lady in America studies these. Okay, spionids, very common, different types of spionid. I'll just go through these quickly. This is a spio. There are quite a lot of different spios around. I haven't put a name on this because I think there's more species than we think. And they can be different colors and different patterns of pigmentation on them as well. Quite small, maybe about an inch long. Ionides oxycephala. This is very common on your shores. You'll find this under stones, especially when it's a bit mucky. You get lots of oligochaetes as well. You often get this animal. It's sort of greenish color, greenish, sort of pinkish color. Especially if the gut's full, it'd be much more of a green color. And it's got gills here just on the first part of the body. Say very common on the shore, this one. This is Malacosaurus. Malacosaurus are very common on the shore. The common one that you'll find, especially when there's decaying detritus, decaying seaweed, is Malacosaurus vulgaris. And that's the one we've got here. Described from Berwick upon Tweed. You can get thousands in a small area. But this one's a larger one, not so frequent, but you do get it on our shores. This is Malacosaurus gerardi. It's sort of generally yellow or pinky yellow color, sometimes very bright yellow. And this one can be, 5 inches long or something, so 5 or 6 inches. Quite robust animal. The head end is here, and you can see this is its palps. Got these bands on it, and it's got a sort of T-shaped head. You can just see the sort of horns. Well, they call horns, but they're just projections of the prostomium out the side. And then this is its prostomium back here. You can just see 2 little eyes here, and then the gills along the back, the blood vessels there. So quite a spectacular animal. It tends to like sort of gravelly mixed sediments, and you can get it on the shore, especially near low water on mixed sediment shores. Now this one's a bit of a pest. This is Bucardia proboscidea, and it's come into Britain, in the last 20, 30 years. It might have been here before that, but it's certainly spread throughout Britain, probably late 90s, early 2000s. It seemed to be probably in the south of Britain earlier on. And this animal's all over the world, and it's been transported around with oysters and things. And they've done genetics on it, and it's the same species. It's got a very good mode of reproduction. It can produce small pelagic larvae, and it can produce large, sort of more benthic larvae. So it's got that distinction, and it's taking over habitats all over the shores. So it's very common. It can bore into things. It can just live in sand. It's quite large. I mean, it can be a few inches long, but it's sort of out competing. It's a Polydoran type animal. It's out competing our normal ones like Polydora ciliata and things like that. It's out competing them now. Okay, so Polychaetous serpens, I've got an interest in this worm. Described from Plymouth. I've been working on these around the world. Quite hard to find, quite hard to get hold. This one you can see is regenerated its tail. This one's from France. So I've been trying to collect it in Plymouth with limited success. And of course, with COVID, I haven't been able to go down. But anyway, it's quite spectacular. It's like a bottle brush. It's got all these bristles. It's got about, I don't know, 13 different types of bristle on it. They're very, very interesting animals. Okay, serratulids, I'll just go through these quickly. Serratulus serratus, common one you'll find. It's probably not serratus. There's probably different species. Typically it has some eyes. You can't quite see them here, but there's a row of eyes here. The tentacles come off all together on the first junction of the first segment. And there's probably quite a few species around, and probably needs to be genetics get into these. But this is the one you'll find typically on your shores. And then the next one you'll find is just the same thing, just to show the gills. Go on to the next one. Probably more common, you'll find Cirriformia tentaculata, quite spectacular, large, find it under stones, quite happy to live in very nasty sort of sediments and things. And then the gills, or the tentacles, sorry, these are the gills down here, but these are the tentacles. They all come off about segment four or five, round about that area. Can be 5 or 6. There's quite a range. And again, there could be more than one species of them, but this is quite common. This is the one you might just see the gills and tentacles sticking up out through the sand. Okay, I'll just go through this quickly. Flabellarigidae. This one's Diploceras glaucus. I just wanted to show you that. It's got 2 types of gills, which it can retract inside its anterior. It's got these wedge-shaped ones, and then these long cirriform ones. It's got 2 pairs of each. And then this is its palps for feeding. They're curled up. One I described with one of my colleagues from offshore is another Diploceras. This was described not so long ago from the Irish Sea. You could, even if you didn't look at the characteristics, you could see the papillae are completely different on this, on the body of it. Right. I'll go through these quite quick. This is Ophelia bicornis, this is a preserved one. When these are live, they're reddish green, jeweled like sort of appearance, and very pretty. They only occur in certain areas, the Exe estuary. This one's from Bury Inlet, South Wales. It's preserved, so it's all white. It's lost the colour. Ophelia acuminata, quite a sort of eel-like animal, very delicate pink colour. Got this anal sort of flap, spoon-like flap here, anal cirrus. Common in muddy sediments offshore. And a similar type animal is Armandia polyophthalma. Armandias differ from Ophelinas, but they have these eye spots along the side. You can see the gills as well. Again, it's got an anal funnel, different type of anal funnel. And this is its proboscis here. Okay. Scalabregma, this is one I described. This is a preserved specimen. It's Scalabregma celticum. You can get it on the shore, but it's mostly offshore, often in different types of sediment, mixed sediments, and very common in certain areas. Another one you find on the shore, Owinia. Now, again, we've been doing some research on these recently, and they found more species. Everybody used to just call them all Owinia fusiformis. This one's out of its tube at the top. You can see the sort of crown of tentacles at the top where it feeds. And you'll find these on the shore. if there's a storm, you'll get them washed up. They're sort of the bits of shell and everything stick out, sort of all sort of interleafed, and the animal tapers at the tube tapers at both ends. Quite large. Capitella, it looks like a oligochaete, but this is a Capitellidae, quite nondescript in a way. It's got capillary chaetae in the anterior part here in the thorax, and then small hooks, the rest of the body. Again, there's quite a few species of these and they've not been properly sorted out. Bamboo worms, this is one you might find on the shore. Obviously, this is out of its tube. Quite actually colourful when you see them. This is like Liachone. It's got this pad on this segment here, which is quite distinctive. Not much of a head, and there's the anal sort of pygidium is quite distinctive in this species. Some of them have cirri. Petaloproctus terricolus, this one lives encrusted on in tubes on stones. This one's from the Fleet, actually. It was described from Brittany, and you can see this sort of large plate-like pygidium tail end. The head is just not very well developed. It's got these nuchal slits, the sense organs here, and you can see the color changes as it goes along the body. And then this one, I'm not sure if you'll get this here. You get this in Brittany, and it's described from Brittany. This is Johnstonia climenoides. I've done a paper on this, and well, from around the world. And it's got these cirri in the posterior region, which are quite distinctive. This characteristic of the genus. It's got a small sort of rim around the head, a bit like a pie crust. And you can see different colors and different glands along the body. So just to show you, that's what the animal looks like live out of its tube. And these are some drawings I made in 1993. And the shading here illustrates the glandular areas of the body. These stain up if you use methyl green staining. Okay, quickly going past, everybody knows what the lugworm looks like. This is Diphodians, so-called black lug, has a very regular cast, whereas Araniculum aranat just spews it out very irregularly. This one tends to be much larger, but it's not always black. This is the same species, so you get different colors. These are all Diphodians. And going on to Araniculades, again, another type of Aranicula, you get this under stones, Araniculades branchialis, you'll get that on the shores here. In fact, you'll get two species, I think, on the shore here, but this is branchialis. Sternaspis is quite a strange animal. This is actually the anterior, and it can retract this into the main body. This is a posterior region. This is the gills. Quite an odd animal. These are quite common in Poole Harbour and off Plymouth as well. Subliteral. You've got these spines at the anterior. Again, it can be, an inch long or so. Quite dumpy little animals. And Sabellaria now, everybody knows Sabellaria reefs and things. You'll be familiar with these, certain areas on the shore, encrusting on rocks. This is what the animal looks like out of its tubes. There's a dorsal view and a ventral view. It's got this anal tube for defecation. Quite a complicated animal, different regions, different things, gills. It's got some gills at the anterior, which you can't quite see. Well, you can see, sorry, here. Got gills along the back. Yep. And that's a close-up of the head region, these crown of bristles. This is alveolata. If it was spinulosa, it would have a long spiny spine coming out of the middle of each of these spines. But alveolata is a common one you'll get on the shore here. Okay, ice cream cone worm. This is Amphictynorachoma. It lives in a cone-like tube. This one's got a serrated edge, and it has tentacles here for feeding, and gills are here. They're quite a short animal, but they can be quite long. Amphictynorachoma has a very long curved tube, very pretty. The other common one you'll get here is Lagus carene. The tube is straighter and not quite so elegant, but very nice. Getting on near the terebellids now. So amphorettids, this is a Amphictine gunneri. Amphorettids tend to have few tentacles at the front, and they have the head region here with the tentacles can get withdrawn into the mouth, whereas with terebellids, they're always exposed. So it's a difference between terebellids or terebelliforms and amphorettids is that the gills can be retracted into the mouth region. And there's a close-up of the head. You can see the prostomium here. There's some eyes, and then the tentacles, which have got a groove on them. And then these are the gills here. And it's got these long spines coming out the front. You can just see them there. I say this is Amphicty's gunneri, but again, there's quite a few species around that have been mixed up. Everybody used to call them Amphicty's gunneri. Okay, terebellids. So this is very common in crevices in Britain, especially down the south coast. Amphitritides gracilis, two pairs of branched gills, and then this quite sort of whitish long tail end. And you can get them in crevices alongside Terebella lapidaria on the south coast, Plymouth, Looe areas. I'm sure you get them in North Devon as well. Fairly large animal, so you know it's that ends the tentacles. And another common one you'll get is Eupolimnia nebulosa. Oh, so this one's got, go back a bit. This one's got three pairs of branched gills. It's got this very speckled pattern on it, and the gills have also, the tentacles have also got white splashes on them. And this is the real one. This was originally described from Cornwall, Devon, Cornwall, by Montague. But there are a group of species that look like this from Scandinavia to Mediterranean. And I know the Scandinavian one is different. The genetics are different, and it doesn't have it has just clear, the tentacles don't have any splashes on them. But otherwise it will look very similar. So yeah, just a dorsal view. You can see the three pairs of gills here, branch gills, and then this white splashes on the thing. Called a strawberry spaghetti worm. Okay, near the end now. So this is a fan worm, sabellid. It's got these it's got these eyes on near the end of the stalks, and the two sort of in the middle tend to be a bit longer and stick up, but you can see the eyes are on several of the radials here. It's now called Acromegaloma fasciculosum. This was described from the Plymouth area by Montague. And my colleague, Teresa Derbyshire, has been back to the exact locality and collected it again. So it's still there. And just to end up, serpulids, Serpulus vermicularis. It's got this operculum, reddish bit of operculum. It shuts off the tube, and you can also see spirorbins, other animals encrusting on it, their tubes on top of its tube. These can grow into large reefs in certain areas, like in Loch Rieran up in Scotland, and yeah, they're regarded as a bit vulnerable to damage. Another one people go on about is Filigrana implexa, quite a delicate animal, delicate tubes, forms masses of them, and it's got these two very delicate sort of fleshy opercula, just cup-like fleshy, no hard operculum. And there's a similar animal called Salmacina, which has the same type of tubes, but it doesn't have any operculum. It's a different genus. And just to end up, I said about annelids at the beginning. These are Echeuran spoonworms. They have this long proboscis. They've got two bristles here, hook-like bristles. You'll get them down the south coast in crevices, quite common, quite large animals. And that's a large proboscis on it. You see the two hooks here. These are annelids, but they're very highly derived. But you'll see them in the books called spoonworms or echeurands, because everybody always asks, have you got a book? And unfortunately, there isn't a book. There's lots of literature, and there's some older books which are out of date, which are still useful, but really for identifying polychaetes, you're using a lot of different sources. And you're not just looking at a picture. You're having to look at details if you want to go to species level for quite a few of them. But that said, I mean, some of the literature will be in French or one Swedish, but the Swedish one's got an English part to it as well. So I'll just quickly take you through that, and then we can go on to more specific things if you want after that. Okay. Right. So polychaete identification. I mean, there is a series called the Linnaean Society Synopsis of British Fauna, and there's been a few volumes published, but they've been quite sporadic, and of course it takes quite a while to do these, and different people. Originally it was a great idea and it was allocated to lots of different people, and then some people did it and some people didn't do it. I've never really been involved in it. I've been tentatively asked to do one once, but not anything sort of. I was asked to collaborate with somebody else, but that's all. And so these are the only ones that have been published, and I put the links in. I haven't checked these two links, so but with the titles and things, you'll be able to find them easily. But for copies of them, you might have to go online to secondhand book places and things like that, because I'm not sure they're all in print. I'm not sure they're all directly available. Right, now two old books are Fauvel's 1923 and 27, Polychaetes errantes and sedentarius. They're in the Faune de France series, and you can download them. So if you go to the Faune de France website, you'll see lots of other ones as well, of course. You'll see ones on amphipods and things too. So, some of you may be interested in some of the other marine fauna, but the polychaete ones are in the invertebrates, volume 5 and 16. There's quite a list of these things. They've been going for a long time, and it's all in French, but there are keys. A lot of the names will be out of date now, but at least you get a description, you get keys, and you get some drawings. The drawings are not fantastic, but they're functional. As I said, it's out of date, but I find it still very useful. And then there's the NMBA QC scheme, which have got several keys that have been done by various people over the years, and some are better than others. I mean, but you can download them as well from the NABAQC website. Tim Worsford is sort of organizes that bit. So these two are what there's another thing called the Macrobenthids of the North Sea, and they have sort of keys to the animals and short descriptions and some line drawings. And they have two types of key. They have a pictorial one where you click on, I think it looks like this, and then it takes you to the next thing. Or they have a text one where it asks you questions and you then go through the key. So it's interactive. Now the top link, sorry, go back. the top link, it's not too. So that's useful. That's the North Sea. It's been done to help people who are obviously doing survey work and things. And it's not just polychaetes, obviously. They have all different other animals there as well. But these are the links to the polychaete bit. But if you want, you could explore that. Right, Norwegian. There's a Norwegian polychaete forum which Ivan Hug and some others are involved in, and it's not just Norwegian. Obviously, other Scandinavians come as well, and they've done. Ivan Hug's done a couple of guides to Lumbreneridae and Flabellarigidae, and you can download them from that site. I think he might have done the NMBA QC ones as well. So. And then there's the Swedish one I was talking about. This is my friend Fred and Arne. Now this is a very nice book they've done, and it's been done for Swedish sort of fauna type thing, and it's in Swedish. And they've got actually the book has got very nice photographs because Frederick is. I mean, if you think my photographs are good, his are even better. Now. You used to be able to download the whole thing as a PDF, but when I tried yesterday, it couldn't find the link. But the one I did find, which is actually much smaller anyway, it's only 4.7 megabytes, is actually key. So it's a sort of key with some photographs or line drawings, and it's in Swedish on one side and English on the other side. So, and that will take you to different families. So it's a start if you want a way in, and it's so the book is very nice. You can buy it from Sweden. I can't remember the link, but I'm sure if you put the title in, this title into Google, you probably find it one way or another. And this is actually it's not a very good picture, but this is a book called Polychaetes by Greg Rouse and Fred Blale, and so Oxford University Press. Now I think it's out of print just now. You probably can find the second-hand copy somewhere, but they are working on a second edition, so that's liable to come out. I don't know if it's this year or probably this year, because they've been working on it for the last couple of years. So. There's a second edition of this, and that's like it's like a coffee top book, table book, but it's just absolutely full of information and photographs and things. So it's a textbook, really. So if you're really interested in them, that'd be worth trying to get hold of that when it comes out. Probably won't be cheap being Oxford University Press, though, but. And just a few plugs, as I told you earlier on, was at I was actually the main organizer of the 12th International Polychaete Conference alongside my colleagues at the museum in my section I was in charge of. We ran it, and there's still some stuff on the museum website. I think I put a link up earlier, but and in among that there are some people put their presentations up. They sent them in. Some people sent their posters in. So you can actually browse through that if you're so inclined. So just just to say that that's a resource that's available. There's a website there, unless they've changed it. But I think I looked at it yesterday, so it's still there. And then this is not current just now, but we did have an exhibition at the same time as the conference. We did an exhibition on worms called Wriggle, and it was quite big. This is just one small portion of it. There's a model of a strawberry spaghetti worm there, and some various photographs and things. We had stuff on earthworms. We had stuff on fossils, things that might be worms or not worms, how to collect worms. We had a small aquarium with hermit crabs in it. We're trying to show the Neanthes fucata with the hermit crab. So So, you know, we had, it was a very unpopular exhibition, and it went on for much longer than it was supposed to. And they still have it, so they still will tour it round if somebody wants it. And the good thing is they've done it so that parts of it can be displayed. The last I heard, it was there was a Rigo exhibition on in West Wales, but of course with the shutdown and everything, things aren't gone too well for visiting these things. But just to say that, you know, you wonder about polychaetes or worms, because it was all worms. It wasn't just polychaetes. It was leeches and branchiomdelidins and everything as well. People were genuinely interested, and we were very well pleased. It's one of the best exhibitions we ever did in terms of popularity. So, and then just another plug for Cardiff Curator. This is on Twitter, and this is is run by my former colleagues at the museum. Cardiff Curator. It's about natural history, but then on Wednesday they have a Worm Wednesday, and Kate Mortimer Jones, she does the worm part of that, and other things as well. And so it's worth tuning in on a Wednesday to check out #Worm Wednesday. And it's not, this is all around the world. People contribute to Worm Wednesday. And then on the 1st of July, we have the International Polychaete Day. And it's on the 1st of July because that's the birthday of the late great Christian Foucauld. And so to commemorate him and to commemorate polychaetes every year, people will put things on the net to do with polychaetes. So the 1st of July, we'll put that in your calendar as well. So just there again, just some addresses and things. If you want to look at research papers, then these are the addresses for ResearchGate, and then Twitter and the Polychaete Conference. So right, so you were asking about my setup. Well, my setup is sort of based around what my friend Fred Playo does. Fred's at Tjärnö Marine Laboratory in Sweden, up near the Norwegian border. And well, it's a great place to be because he has easy access. He can go straight out, and the seabed goes into deep water very quickly, so he can get all sorts of depths and things from the ship without going too far out offshore. So he works there and he photographs, and my system's sort of based around him. I've tweaked quite a few things, but basically, well, he's got a full frame camera. I just use a normal crop frame camera. So the ones I've got are I used to use a Canon D550. I'm now using where's the camera? This one I've been using, it's a 77D, and I've just bought a 90D. And so my photographs are mostly with the 550D or the 77. But as I said, I've just recently, or the last few months, bought a 90D. So I'm thinking of, you know, seeing if it gets better resolution, but it may not. I've got to try it. For the flash gun, you'll see Fred's using Canon flash guns. That's like something like this one, which is a Speedlight 5. This is a 580. I've got two actually. I've got 580 and I've got a 480. I tend to use either one flash gun or two flash guns, one on a slave, the other's just attached to the camera. And when I use one, I usually use like half a bucket or something as a reflector. Here you can see Frederick he's got, it's actually a segment of a bucket, and he's diffusing all the light through from all sides. Sometimes he uses 4 flash guns, which is a bit excessive. But recently, I mean, this came from Steve down in Dorset, Steve Truella. I was down at his place, and he was using this twin flash cannon, which is what's the model name again? Oh yeah, that's that. That's I don't know if you can see that very well. Maybe I'll go backwards. Yeah, that's better. And it's got two flashes on it, and he uses it on his lens, at the end of their lens. But I found that when I was doing that, the lens was starting to creep. So I've now mounted the flashes. I made up some small sort of rigs. So I've now got the flashes on a small sort of crane type thing with a weight, and then the flash. And so that's what I'm going to be trying next, because the thing about it is you want to get as black a background as you can, and that's my biggest problem, is getting black backgrounds. I should say I've got a frame like this, like Fred's got. I built one myself out of wood, and it's got a hole in it. So basically, you've got a hole as the black part. And I've actually made it totally enclosed, and I've lined the whole thing with telescope material which absorbs light. So, and I have tried it on preserved specimens, and you do get a much better black background. So the whole thing's all to do with well, obviously focus, lighting, getting the light right is crucial. So using the flashes and adjusting them is the best way to go. But as I say, you can get away with just one flash gun. It just probably at the other side, you need some sort of reflector to fill in the thing. And for focusing, you can use something as simple as one of these small LEDs. The ones I use I've got a special one. It's cost hundreds of pounds because I can adjust the light, and I use that for my microscope as well. So I usually have the microscope like this beside the thing, and I usually have the lights here, so I can swing the lights from looking here or illuminating the animal. And you want to illuminate the animal for focus reasons. So once you focus, you don't have to have the light on it. The flash will do the rest. Now there's two other things. One is that I tend to narcotize the animals. And I'll say a bit about this in a bit. The sort of preferred narcotic is magnesium chloride, 7% in just in fresh water, and then just add it to the seawater, and it makes them lethargic, and then they'll stop moving. But if you put them back in seawater, they're off again. So it's a non-lethal narcotic. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive to get to buy it from a lab. But I bought some for the bath, so I'm going to be trying that. Now I've been warned that it'll depend on the grade, because if it's got lots of impurities, I might get a precipitate or something. So I've not tried it yet. I know some people had and said it was no good, but it certainly looks clear enough if I use it for a bath. So I'm going to try that, because it's a lot cheaper to buy something like that in bulk than to buy it from a laboratory supply place. The other thing you could use is Epsom salts, which would work, just to say magnesium sulfate, that would work as well. So going back to the arrangement, you can see that what Fred's mounted it on. This is a Leica microscope stand, and I actually had a cheaper version made in China, which I got from, I think it's GT Vision.
I've got one somewhere, yes.
And it worked very well, but the fine focus was quite, it is quite basic. It wasn't. This is very refined. This is Leica. Of course, it's expensive, but I a couple of years ago I managed to get some secondhand online column, and then I bought. There's a base under here, flat base, and this is 50 centimeters long. And with the cheap China one was quite interesting. It's got like an end plate, which is sort of end shape, and it's got the the actual camera attachment, like a tripod attachment. So I've actually modified, I've put a bit of oak wood in here, which I modified to take the interface between the Leica and the end plate. So I bought another end plate from GT Vision and or the GT Microscope. It's the same company, and then I've got that on the Leica now, and I've actually my next door neighbour is using the old cheaper one because she's doing a degree project, so she's taking pictures of algae with it. So yeah, I tend to have the microscope beside so that I can go from a petri dish, move the petri dish from here to there, and yeah, that's basically it, really. Well, the other thing is, I like Fred. You can see he's got a MacBook Pro here, so we're actually taking the images tethered to the camera. And the advantage of that is that you've got a 15-inch screen to look at the animal and focus on. And then you can save the images directly to the computer, and then you can import it into whatever your image processing software is. And so, yeah, you can see him. You can see here he's got a series of pictures he's been taking of something. And you with the digital, you can just rattle them off if you think, oh, that's not quite right, until you can take as many as you want, and then you can look at them again later and pick the best ones. So that's really it, I think, for taking them.